Good evening and welcome. My name is Hannah and this is Into the Hollow. On this show, I talk about cases and encounters involving the paranormal and the bizarre. If you have had any strange experiences or encounters with the unknown and would like to share, please contact me at intothehollow@protonmail.com. Tonight's episode is on Carl Tanzler and his corpse bride. Warning, this episode contains graphic descriptions of death and corpse tampering. Discretion is advised. True crime cases like this one particularly intrigue me. I generally gravitate towards anything paranormal or weird, and this case certainly has a paranormal aspect to it. Our story starts in Key West, Florida in 1931. Carl Tanzler was a German immigrant working at a hospital in Key West as a radiology technician. He was born February 8th, 1877, and so was about 54 years old in 1931. A year before this, he had left his wife and children and moved into a home by himself. While working at the hospital, Carl developed an obsession with a 21-year-old Cuban-American patient named Elena Milagro de Hoyos. Despite being married with children, Carl felt that Elena was his destiny and his soulmate. During his childhood, and later while briefly visiting Italy, he claimed to have had visions of a dead ancestor named Countess Anna Constantia von Kossel. This ancestor showed him visions of the face of his one true love, an exotic, dark-haired woman. Elena had been brought to the hospital by her mother for an examination. Carl recognized Elena as the woman he had been shown in his visions. Elena was known as a local beauty in the area, and she was also married, however separated from her husband at the time. Unfortunately, Elena was dying of tuberculosis, a horrible respiratory disease that at this time was practically a death sentence. Carl took it upon himself to care for her. He set up extra equipment in her parents' home and created concoctions or medicines that he believed would cure her. Carl showered Elena with gifts such as jewelry and clothing. Allegedly, Carl did profess his love for her, however, there is no evidence of his feelings being reciprocated by Elena. Despite Carl's best efforts, Elena died on October 25th, 1931, and Carl was completely heartbroken. With the permission of Elena's family, Carl paid for her funeral and then commissioned an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery. Carl visited the mausoleum almost every night in secret. He later said that Elena's spirit would come to him when he sat by her grave and sang songs to her. He said her spirit would speak with him and ask him to take her from the grave. After 2 years of late-night visits, Carl removed Elena's body from the mausoleum, placed her in a toy wagon, and took her to his home. Now, 2 years will do a great amount of damage to a body. She was in really bad condition. Carl attached her bones together with piano wire and coat hangers. He fitted her face with glass eyes to replace her decomposed ones. And as her flesh continued to rot, he replaced it with silk cloth soaked in wax and plaster, a morbid papier-mâché. He made her a wig from her hair as it fell from her decomposing scalp. Rags were used to fill her abdominal and chest cavity to keep her form intact. And no doubt, due to the smell, Carl doused her in perfumes, disinfectants, and preserving agents to help conceal the odor of her rotting body and to slow down the decomposition. He dressed her in fine clothes and placed jewelry on her corpse. Carl lived with, danced with, and even slept with her body. He even had plans to, quote, create a spacecraft to fly Elena's corpse into the stratosphere so that radiation from outer space could penetrate her tissues and restore her. 7 years of this later, and Alina's sister had heard rumors of Carl's strange behavior and possible grave robbery. She stormed to his home to confront him and was horrified to discover that the rumors were true. The sister notified the police, who promptly arrested Carl. Carl was psychologically evaluated and was found to be mentally competent, somehow. He was to stand trial for, quote, wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. The charges were later dropped, and he was released due to the statute of limitations for the crime having expired. As if Alina's body hadn't been disturbed enough, her corpse was put on public display at a local funeral home. Over 6,000 people came to view her wax-like body. Even crazier was the positive public opinion of Carl. People saw him as an eccentric romantic, of all things. I guess Florida has always been a wild place. Finally, her body was returned to the cemetery in an unmarked grave to prevent Carl from digging her back up again. Now, if all this wasn't creepy enough, the story gets weirder. Apparently, an autopsy was done on her tampered corpse. 2 physicians discovered that a tube had been inserted in her vaginal region, which allowed for, well, you know. After this incident, if you can call it that, he lived in a home near his estranged wife, who actually helped support him as he got older. The weirdness doesn't stop there. Separated from Alina, he made a life-size effigy, including a mask of plaster made in her likeness, and lived with it until his death at age 75 in 1952. His body was discovered on the floor of his home 3 weeks after his death, and the obituary recounted, quote, a metal cylinder on a shelf above a table, in it wrapped in a silken cloth and a robe, was a waxen image. It has been theorized that Carl had managed to have the body switched before burial, and he had died with her real corpse. This case was a wild ride. Very strange behavior from Carl. I was shocked that the public perception of him was positive, and that his estranged wife had even helped care for him in his later years. To me, this was almost just as strange as the creepy corpse tampering. Who does that? I know if my husband went nuts and was living with the corpse of another woman, I think I'd need a lot of therapy, and I don't think I'd stick around or come back after the fact. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed learning about this disturbing case, and I want to thank you for journeying with me into the hollow.